Hello, this is my university passion project for animation. Originally, it was to teach myself an industry standard animation software that I could use to make a fluid dynamic animation sequence. But then I realized, what software do I want to learn? How much is it going to cost me? Will I actually be able to do such a thing? I've tried teaching myself free animation programs in the past, but there are so many different tools and settings, and I can never seem to navigate it, and I always just end up giving up. But then I realized that that topic alone is worth exploring. If you're interested in animation, or you do digital art and want to move to software that supports it, there's a high chance you found yourself doing the exact same thing I have. So I want to dedicate this passion project to you and guide you through the two animation programs I've heard lots of good things about, Krita and Blender. I aim to learn the basics of each, sum up the pros and cons I find, and help guide anyone who might want to learn these programs for themselves. I don't want to learn a new animation software. I want to already be good at it as soon as I pick it up and already know everything. In the past, I've created short animatics using Corel Painter Essential 6, which is a 2D art software I redeemed years ago when I got my drawing tablet. However, this program doesn't support animation, so I would draw and edit each frame individually, save each one as a JPEG, and then export them to a different software to put them together alongside the audio, which was a long, tedious process. You know that animation you just saw? Here's all the frames, just saved individually in my computer. In my last year of university for animation, I looked around at some of my peers to see incredible work, so now I aim to break out of that bad habit and find a software that truly works for me. And if I can help you too, that's great. The first animation software I wanted to try was Krita, which is a free open source painting program. Krita is highly regarded online as it's got a wide range of features and numerous tools for creating many different kinds of art, all while not costing a penny. One of the things I noticed as soon as I booted up Krita was that it wasn't just a 2D animation software, it opened up ready for digital art. Following an online guide, I opened up an animation timeline and workspace, and found myself ready to go, with it now looking like this. It's quite nice, I like that. Yeah. Through navigating the timeline and testing out different tools, I made a short animation based on the typical bouncing ball style of animation practice, as seen here. This is only a quick test, but one thing I really like about Krita is its accommodation for digital drawing. It feels very natural to draw each frame with the tools provided, and if you're used to 2D drawing, you'll find Krita fairly familiar. Here, let me show you real quick. So when you load up Krita, the only thing you need to do to make it animation ready is to go Settings and then Dockers. From there you can add things like animation timeline, brush presets, layers, onion skins, and anything else you might need. And bear in mind, this is just what I selected. There are many more useful tools at your disposal. From here you've got the color selector, you've got your brushes, and here you can add blank frames if you want to draw a completely new image, or add a duplicate frame if you want to have the same frame as last time but just want to add something new. Now this isn't all the tools that Krita has to offer, far from it actually. But this is all I needed to make a short 2D animation, which just goes to show that Krita, being a 2D art software with animation integrated into it, makes it really effective. There we go. To be clear, an animation software doesn't need to be 2D focused to be good. It just means that Krita is easy to understand if you're trying to do 2D animation, so I consider this a personal pro. You could argue that this is a limitation on Krita's part, since animation softwares like Blender can run in 2D and 3D. However, I don't really consider this something to hold against Krita, as there are so many programs out there that can do 3D animation just fine. Krita's just specialized in 2D, and it works for what it needs to do. As you can see, I went back to that animation I did, and with very little prior knowledge, I was able to fully color it. The familiarity of a 2D art program just benefits Krita. That being said, I will put the limitation on the cons list just to make it fair. Just for you. While we're talking about cons, I do know that there were a few things I ran into while I was doing this. Like, there's no undo button along the top, and this might just be me. And I mean, I could just press Ctrl plus C, but I feel like the navigation could be a little bit more beginner friendly. Although, again, practice makes perfect. I'm sure there are people that don't have this issue at all. Anyway, want to see my video? There it is. Yeah. Pretty spiffy, huh? Honestly, even though my time with Krita has been short, I really think it's a great piece of software. It's got all the tools and options that you'd want out of an animation program, and it's even pretty close to a product like Adobe Photoshop, which is incredible when you consider the fact that it's absolutely free. Literally just putting the word Photoshop into Google for that little PNG of their logo, the first thing that came up was Photoshop vs. Krita. Gonna pull up that pros and cons list again, because what? All this is to say, if you're looking for a 2D animation software that is beginner friendly, but has loads of different options and is pretty down close to industry standard, Krita is definitely a good place to start. Wait! Get down from there now! Get down! You remember earlier when I said that Blender could work in 2D and 3D? We're about to explore that. Get ready, because it definitely gets interesting. So when you first load up Blender, Oh. Okay. This is where Blender's versatility gets interesting. If you want to do some 2D animation, you gotta go into File, and then go 2D Animation. Once you've got that sorted, you should be in a somewhat familiar space. As you can see on the left, you've got your pens, and if you click up here, you can see some specific ones. I tend to go with F Ink pen, but it's truly up to you. Over here you can see we've got the radius, which is the size of the pen, and the strength, which is basically how solid the line is. Now, before I go on any further, I would quickly like to point out, this is still a 3D space. And that did confuse me for a second. Oh. Now that you know how to draw in Blender, I can really quickly show you what I mean. So here you've got this little guy here that I drew, and if you go into the top right and turn the angle, he goes diagonally, like on the different axis. He's 2D and 3D. I don't like it. I mean, obviously I understand the idea of 3D in a 2D space, and it's really good for people who need to 3D model, but it's a learning curve that's difficult. I know this is just me personally, and I'm sure people have gotten used to this and they know Blender, but as much of a benefit it has of being 2D and 3D, it makes it a lot harder to learn the software if you're starting from scratch. Gotta get them pros and cons in. Anyway, to continue on. Due to using 3D and 2D, Blender also boasts different modes for what you might need to do. For example, you start out in draw mode, but if you want to edit the image, you go into object mode, which lets you manipulate your drawing. This is interesting because you can do simple things like move your drawings left or right, rotate them, or you can even mess with the nodes of each individual line you've drawn. And if you really want to, you can even mess with this in 3D. I'm truly not sure what use this would have, but I'm sure people would find a way to make it useful. Finally, we move on to animating, and down the bottom you've got your timeline, along with this little circle button which helps you automatically keyframe as you go from frame to frame. I decided to go for some simple circles this time, and as I scroll through each frame, you can see the process of slowly making the ball bounce off the floor. There is of course the style of animation where you edit your images as you go, so here I've just drawn a simple circle using the circle tool this time, and I'll go into edit mode, and then simply just drag the circle along. While we're talking about moving stuff around, you can find your onion skin settings by clicking this little green symbol here. It's labeled data, and it has all these different settings in it, but this is where you can locate your settings for onion skinning specifically. I hope this is easy enough to follow. Honestly, Blender is a program that I really struggle to wrap my head around. At the beginning I mentioned software in the past that I downloaded, looked at 5 seconds and then ended up deleting. Blender is one of those. I think it's really good for what it does, and I can see why people find it very useful, but if this is my personal critical analysis, I might have to say it's a bit too complicated for my needs specifically. If you could think of ways you could utilize these 2D and 3D aspects together, or Blender just looks like the type of thing for you, please don't let my opinion sway you. This is just one of those programs where you have to try it out for yourself and see if you can wrap your head around it. I just wanted to specifically state this, because I don't want my limited knowledge and experience to turn you away from a software that you might go on to make amazing things with. Now, let me wrap up the Blender section by exporting the video I've made. Over here on the right, you've got an output button, which looks like a little printer. When you click on it, you can see the resolution of your video, as well as the frame rate. These are things you can change if need be. Down here, you've got your file selection, and if you click it, you can choose what file to save your video in. You're also going to want to make sure that your file format is FFmpeg video, as I believe it starts out on PNG. And finally, make your way into encoding, and change the container to an MP4, so you can actually have an MP4 video. There are a few other things I could go over with Blender, for example, the coloring, but due to it being a 2D and 3D software, that can get quite complicated, and honestly, instead of pretending I know what I'm talking about, I highly recommend that if you want to learn more, there are very many helpful tutorials online, which does in fact lead us to our next segment.
There's only one way to find out.
So in this section, I'm going to look at the pros and the cons of both Krita and Blender that I've looked at throughout the video so far, and put them beside each other, including a few things that apply to both. For example, since both are free, they're accessible to a large number of people who are then able to make tutorials about them online. It probably goes without saying that there are tutorials for almost anything you search up on the internet these days. However, with Krita and Blender being so accessible, it means that pretty much anyone can hop online and learn it. So if you're having an issue with one of these programs, there's a very high chance someone has already made a video explaining how to solve it. Pow! 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 Although, Krita has tablet support, so if you want to look at a screen and see what you're drawing on it, feel free to do that, whereas Blender does not have support. That being said though, neither are supported on an iPad or smart tablet, so you can't just download it from the App Store or anything. And if you want to, you could still use a drawing tablet within Blender, so really they're kind of equal. In order to effectively look at the pros and cons of these software, I'm going to compare them to one more program which is actually not free to use, Clip Studio Paint. This is another program that I hear a lot of my peers saying good things about, so I wanted to include it just to compare what you can get for your money versus what you can get for free. This in mind, you can actually get a free trial for Clip Studio Paint, so if you wanted to try it out for yourself, you are still able to do that before paying up. Similarly to Krita, Clip Studio Paint was made with 2D in mind, so if you find Krita easy to understand, you'll probably understand Clip Studio Paint as well. It also has a whole store with a bunch of different creator-made resources such as brushes and references, as well as a mannequin feature so you can get pose references for your drawings. However, this of course does cost money, and if you want to use it on multiple devices, you'll have to buy a subscription as well. On the subject of money, there are two different ways you can purchase Clip Studio, which is Clip Studio Pro, a one-time purchase of $50, which is just over £39 if you're British, or a monthly payment plan of $5 a month. The main advantage of this version is that it gives you access to mobile versions. Or there's a Clip Studio EX version, which has a monthly payment of $8.99 a month, or a one-time purchase of $219. That's £172. This is going off of their usual information, by the way. I know these screenshots show that there's a deal going on at the moment, but this is the basic info of what you need to know. Right, let's have a look at what we've got. So of course, with Krita, it was a lot more focused for 2D animation, but that did hold it back in some places. Whereas of course, Blender had a lot more options and a lot more things you could do, but that made it kind of complicated for new learners. But does this make it worth buying a software like Clip Studio Paint? For people just starting off with 2D animation, I think either Krita or Blender would be a good place to start. However, for me personally, I found Krita a lot more accommodating for newcomers, and a lot more easy to understand. This of course allows your skills to grow, to the point where maybe one day you could move up to Blender, but through my personal findings from this passion project, I think Krita has won my top spot. Thanks for sticking with me through this video. Checking out all these different programs was really fun, even if I struggled here and there. And hey, if you feel differently about any of these software, just feel proud that you combated something that I could not. I don't know how to end videos. Bye!